They say princesses don't lie. They say they live in the light, with heads held high, their hearts armored by crowns and obligations. But no one teaches a princess what to do when her heart chooses someone not approved by the script. My name is Melinda, and I was raised to be perfect. The daughter of the country's most influential senator, the woman everyone expected to see smiling beside a political heir, the centerpiece of a puzzle that kept entire families in public harmony. I grew up in society columns, exclusive schools, mirrored ballrooms where love was nothing more than an accessory born of convenience. I never had the right to doubt until the day he appeared, not as a storm nor as a romance novel hero, but as a crack Elijah. The name seemed too simple for the impact he had. A direct gaze, a sincere word, and the comfortable silence only found beside someone who never wanted anything but your truth. It was there, between a rehearsed toast and an interrupted conversation, that I understood the danger he posed. Not to me, but to everything built upon me. And it was there, too, that I made my first real decision, to hide him. I'm not proud of it, but I don't regret it either. My entire life, I was watched like a mirror. Others saw in me what they wanted, to reflect the obedient daughter, the charismatic young woman, the exemplary fiancée. But Elijah didn't look at me like they did. He saw me, not as an extension of my family, nor as a magazine cover face, but as a whole woman, even before I saw myself that way. Our meetings happened gradually, in quiet pauses that slipped through my controlled schedule. The world around me was made of appearances, but with him, everything was raw, unpolished, unpretentious. There was something in the way he spoke about injustice, inequality, how we were trained not to feel, that made me want to peel away every layer of varnish they'd coated me with since childhood. But I couldn't, not completely. So I loved him in the dark, in the depths of my thoughts, in the curves of hallways, in stolen minutes that brought my breath back to its place, even as my body was always on the run. The cruelest part of hiding love isn't the lie told to others. It's the lie you have to tell yourself every day. At first I said it was just curiosity, then just friendship. And when the feelings overflowed, I told myself it was only temporary. None of it was true. The truth, the one burning beneath my skin, was that being with Elijah made me feel things the world around me would never allow. And yet, I went to him. Even knowing I was betraying everything I'd been taught, even hearing my mother's voice in every silence, I chose his eyes over speeches. I chose the way he listened to me, as if my words had weight, not just decorative function. I chose the way he touched my hand without haste, as if time was something we could savor. It was too real to fit the label of mistake, but too real, also, to escape the consequences. Keeping him a secret required constant effort. I had to learn to hide signs on my face, control the spark in my eyes, disguise the tremor in my hands when I heard his name, even by chance. At political dinners, I smiled at men who decided the fate of thousands, while my heart begged for 5 minutes in his company. My social engagements became a prison. Every dress I wore, every posed photo, every alliance showcased in charity speeches was a stab against my own freedom. And still, I endured. Because in the moments we were together, far from cameras, phones, eyes programmed to judge, I could be just Melinda. No last name, no obligations, no title, just a woman. But the tranquility of those secret meetings was as fragile as the veil of silence protecting them. It took just one unusual delay, one unjustified absence from my schedule for the stairs to narrow. First my mother, then the advisors. And then, like a whisper turning into a flood, suspicion began to breathe beside me. I found myself watched, even in how I folded a napkin. And still I continued. Because if there's anything stronger than the fear of being discovered, it's the fear of never having lived something true. And with Elijah, everything was true. Too true to abandon, even if it cost everything. That night, the sky seemed heavier than usual. I had returned from a gala where I spent over 2 hours speaking about empathy, equality, and youth, ironies that had become my daily life. My fiancé, impeccable as always, held my hand for the cameras with practiced confidence, and I, draped in sequins, smiled as if I weren't dying inside. But behind every rehearsed gesture, there was only one thought: Elijah, all the time, like a parallel pulse to my own, like a life that existed only when the world wasn't watching. And that night, I broke a promise to myself, to be careful. I sent a message, just one. I need to see you. And I went, without the official car, without security's eyes, alone. For the first time, not caring what might happen. He was waiting for me in the old warehouse where we used to talk. There wasn't enough light, nor comfort. But the warmth of his eyes was all I needed. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. It was as if time unraveled between us whenever we were there. And for a few minutes, everything made sense. The world outside seemed like a distant theater, too far to reach us. But it didn't last. The sound of footsteps, a metallic snap, a glint of something in the dark. And suddenly, someone was watching us. I don't know who. I couldn't see, but I knew. And it was as if a door slammed shut inside me with violence. My instinct screamed. Elijah tried to calm me, but it was too late. The secret had been seen. I returned home feeling the weight of a condemnation not yet announced. The next day, the atmosphere at home was different. They didn't say anything, but they knew. My father's gaze was ice. My mother didn't speak to me. My fiancé? He smiled more than usual, smiled like someone preparing for an attack. I knew in that moment that my time was running out, that the secret wouldn't be mine for much longer. And worse, that Elijah was now in danger. Not for what we did, but for what we represented. I, the daughter of power. He, the symbol of what power never accepts, a love without political alliance. It was that day I understood that what had once been just a secret had become a threat. I woke the next day with a strange clarity. My life, as I knew it, was about to collapse. Not because anything had been said aloud. No one confronted me, no one accused me, but the silence around me had shifted in tone. It was a strategic silence, the kind that precedes a war. My father began to watch me, as if assessing unstable ground. My mother resumed insisting on commitments I'd already declined, and my fiancé, with suffocating cordiality, sent flowers. Every day, as if the arrangements were fences trying to contain an imminent escape. I knew they were preparing. I was the piece threatening the board, and they were determined to put me back in place, by force, if necessary. But what they didn't know was that I was no longer the same. Something had awakened in me with Elijah, something that could no longer be lulled back to sleep. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw less of the senator's daughter and more of the woman he helped reveal. A woman who wanted to live by choices, not protocol. Our meetings, though riskier, became even more intense. It was as if the looming threat of loss made every touch carry centuries of urgency. Elijah knew something was wrong, felt the noose tightening, but whenever he saw me, he smiled as if he still believed love was enough. And for a while I wanted to believe it too. I wanted to believe that running away was possible, that starting over somewhere far away would save us from the sentence society was about to impose. But it wasn't that simple. The first threat came as an invitation, a closed dinner among influential families where I would be reintroduced to the world as the future wife of the ideal heir. The table would be surrounded by allies, disguised photographers, venomous smiles, and at the center of it all, me, a gleaming trophy meant to cover any scandal. That's when Elijah made the proposal, to run away, for real, to leave everything behind, the name, the commitments, the privileges, the inheritance. Just the two of us, free. The idea sounded like both freedom and madness, and my heart swung between courage and fear like an unsteady pendulum. Part of me wanted to say yes, now without thinking, but another part, wounded by years of imposed loyalty, still feared the echo of the fall. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just cried. And he held me like he already knew something inside me was still trapped. He didn't pressure me. He only said, "When you decide, I'll be waiting." And then he stepped back. Not out of anger, but out of love. Because he understood that no escape is true if you're not whole. The following weeks were a minefield of silences and disguises. I kept playing my roles, smiling for photos, speaking at events, accepting smiles and handshakes as if I weren't in pieces inside. Elijah vanished from my visible paths, but remained alive in everything I touched. His scent seemed to cling to my clothes, even after washing. His words surfaced at the most random moments, as if my mind refused to let him go, even as my steps were tethered to the ground I was trained to stay on. And in that in-between space, between who I was and who I wanted to be, I began to realize that everything around me was more fragile than they'd made me believe. The engagement, for example, it was a performance, an unsigned but firmly agreed upon contract. My fiancé, Henry, already knew of my hesitation, and contrary to what I expected, he didn't react with moral outrage. He reacted with calculation. He took me to dinner at a restaurant reserved just for us, and between one glass of wine and another, he told me he knew about Elijah. There was no hatred in his voice. There was strategy. He didn't want love. He wanted alliance, projection, the shine of the image we built together. "You can keep your little romance," he said, "as long as you know how to separate things, as long as he doesn't tarnish our future." Those words disgusted me. I felt like a coin, a piece on a board he thought he could manipulate with charm and promises of power. I left that dinner certain that the prison I lived in was even tighter than I'd imagined. They didn't just want me to behave. They wanted me to stop feeling, and it was in that void of dignity that the first real threat emerged. A family advisor, someone who grew up by our side, called me for an informal talk. He brought an envelope. Inside were photos. Me and Elijah, nothing indecent, just too real. A touch of hands, a look, a shared laugh under the shadow of some alley. "These haven't reached the press yet," he said. "But you understand what could happen, don't you, Melinda?" I understood. In those images, there weren't just two lovers. There was the negation of everything expected of me. The breaking of the image. The exposure of the woman behind the princess. And that they would never accept. That night, I didn't sleep. Elijah texted, "Are you okay?" I didn't reply. I stared at the phone screen like someone facing a definitive choice, and that's when I felt the world darken inside me. For the first time since the beginning, I thought about giving up. Not out of cowardice, but out of love. Love for him. For not wanting to see him destroyed because of me. For not wanting him to be crushed by the weight of the name they forced on me. And there, between silent tears and trembling hands, I made a decision. The next day, with a dry face and a shattered heart, I sent the only message I never thought I'd write. It's over. He didn't reply right away. And I knew in that digital silence that lasted hours that the impact had been too deep for any words to cover. When his response finally came, it was simple, almost cruel in its restraint. I understand. Just that. No pleas, no accusations, no attempts to change my mind. That was Elijah. He always understood what many spent their lives trying to control. And that maturity, that silent surrender, was exactly what destroyed me. Because I knew he still loved me. I knew he was suffering, and yet he let me go. Because he truly loved me. The pain of that separation wasn't loud. It was devastatingly silent, like an absence that fills every corner of the house, even when everything around keeps functioning. The court around me celebrated my sudden emotional realignment. My parents breathed sighs of relief. My mother began referring to me again as an example of balance. And Henry, with that political smile I despised, resumed wedding plans as if nothing had happened. I, in turn, simply became more efficient in my role. My words were always right, my posture impeccable, my obedience flawless. I was a polished porcelain doll, and inside, dead. I threw myself into work with an almost religious fervor. Social engagements, speeches, visits to institutions, meetings with philanthropic foundations, all with a plastered smile and a packed schedule. But every step was anesthesia. Every event, a way to convince myself that the love I felt was just a weakness I needed to overcome. But it wasn't. It was still there. In every place that reminded me of Elijah, in every song, every scent, every street, and even without seeing him, even without hearing his voice, he still lived in me. And that, I realized, no one could take away. Then one gray morning, I received the news that broke what was left of me. Elijah had left the city. He'd gone to the countryside to work on a social project. He left no address, no messages. He just went, as if he knew his presence would only bring more pain. And in that moment, sitting in the armchair I'd occupied since childhood, I looked around and realized I had obeyed. I had done everything they expected, and still I had lost everything that mattered. That was the end of the illusion. It was strange to realize that the world kept turning even after the end. I woke, ate, worked, smiled, slept, and yet everything inside me felt suspended, as if an essential part had been torn out, and the rest was functioning on pure instinct. The people around me said I was at my best. They commented on my glow, my maturity, how I had overcome the crisis. They had no idea it was all just emotional makeup over a wound that remained open, even if it no longer bled outward. The pain had become routine, and the love a memory, but always present, ever present. It was in this state of numbness that invitations began arriving for international events, diplomatic summits, young leadership awards. Everything I'd always been told I wanted to be was now within reach, and it no longer made any sense. One morning, while preparing for one of these events, I found an old letter Elijah had left me, hidden among books. I read it through, heart clenched, and at the end, a sentence I'd missed the first time now seemed to shout, "Even if one day you forget me, I hope you never forget who you were when you were with me." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, I cried without haste. Not for loss, but for truce. Because yes, I remembered exactly who I was beside him, and what I became after letting him go. That's when something began to change. Small, internal, almost imperceptible. I started writing. At night, when everything was silent, when the weight of the mask became unbearable, I sat and wrote. Not stories, not justifications, just what hurt, what burned, what no one could see, Words I once hid now took shape, and without realizing it, those words began to give me back to myself. One day on impulse, I showed the text to a publisher acquaintance of the family. She read in silence, and after a while simply said, "You need to publish this." My answer was no, then maybe, then yes. And in that yes, my life began to find itself again. The book came out under a pseudonym, not out of fear, but for freedom. I didn't want my public image to influence the reading of those pages. They didn't belong to the princess. They belonged to the woman. It was a raw book, without embellishments, without forced happy endings. An emotional account of a woman who loved in secret, who stayed silent to survive, who bled behind smiles, and who, in the end, chose to write because she no longer knew where to store so much pain. There was no promotion, just a discreet submission to a small independent publisher that released it digitally with a simple cover and a direct title, The One Who Hid. I didn't expect a response, but it came. People started talking, sharing, writing back. Women sent me anonymous messages saying, I was her too. Others said the book had put into words a pain they couldn't name. Within months, that text born of my collapse became a voice for so many others who had also been silenced. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I felt I was being heard by those who truly needed to hear. Not the media, not politicians, not image strategists, but real people, real women, like me. When the book finally reached my family, the fallout was silent. No open arguments, no confrontations, just a new kind of silence, the kind of someone who knew they could no longer control the narrative. My engagement was ended, mutually and amicably, according to official statements. And though it made headlines, I no longer cared. I was no longer part of that theater. I had torn up the script. It was shortly after that I received an unexpected invitation to participate in an independent art exhibition. The curator had read my book and wanted me to write short text to accompany works about identity and female liberation. I went. No security, no photographer, no press makeup, just me. And it was there, among canvases and brushstrokes and stories that breathed with their own strength, that I saw him. He was standing in front of an abstract painting, hands in his pockets, with the same silent air as always, as if the world around him were just a backdrop, and he, the only thing truly present. Elijah. The name came to me effortlessly, as if it had never left. My heart reacted before I could control it. A tightening, a memory, a reunion with everything I'd buried to survive. For a moment I thought about retreating, disappearing into the crowd as I had the last time. But this time, no. This time, I was different. This time, I no longer needed to hide. He saw me. His eyes found mine as if they'd been waiting, not with surprise, but with a serenity that only comes with time. I walked to him with steady steps, though inside I still trembled. We didn't know what to say, and for long seconds we said nothing. We just looked at each other, like two who had once been one, and now recognized each other without haste, until he smiled. That slow, inward smile I knew so well, and he said, as if years, absences, and painful goodbyes hadn't passed, I read your book, that was enough. There was no speech, no explanations, no apologies. We didn't need them. Time had done what time does with everything true. It distilled, and there, in front of that painting with the muffled hum of conversations in the background, I knew that the love we once had didn't need to be reclaimed, only honored. We didn't embrace. We didn't make promises. But we walked side by side through the rest of the exhibition, like those who understand that some stories don't need exact endings. Some just continue, even in silence, even transformed, even after the end. Today, when I think of everything I lived through, I don't feel regret. I feel pride for having loved, even in fear, for having endured, even broken, for having written, even silenced for so long, and for having found Elijah again, not as an escape, but as a witness to everything that survived within me. Because I was, yes, the princess who hid a forbidden love, but I was also the woman who, in the end, chose to be free. Time is no longer my enemy. It doesn't erase what I lived through, but it lets me look back with tenderness, even at the parts that hurt. Life moved on differently than they planned for me, and honestly, thank goodness. I'm no longer the face of political campaigns, nor anyone's promised bride. I'm just Melinda, writer, free woman, daughter of a story I tried to bury but now embrace as part of who I've become. Elijah and I didn't have a fairy tale reconciliation, but we found something even more precious: respect. He followed his path. I followed mine. Our roads cross now and then like two rivers that never forgot where they came from. And every time we meet, we exchange smiles that say, we existed, and that's enough. The story I once hid now lives in pages, in canvases, in the voices of other women who dared to recognize themselves. I'm no longer the princess. But today, finally, I'm the owner of my own narrative,